Okay, we have, it's 2 o'clock now, and going to begin this meeting of council. So I wanted to begin this meeting, welcome everybody to the special council meeting. Well, I wanted to start this meeting by letting everybody know that our mayor, unfortunately, over this weekend, had come down with a blood infection and was admitted to the hospital on Friday. And he's still in the hospital currently, but he is actually, he's starting to improve, so that's a blessing. We can see that he's able to get up and walk around a little bit. So we wish him all the best as he continues to heal in the hospital, but it could be another few days, possibly 5 or 6 days of good healing for him. So we wish him all the best as he heals there. So in that being said, then I will be stepping in place to move this council meeting along, and I appreciate your help in as council as well, working through these documents. So for starters, I'd like to begin with a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington we should begin with the disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Is there any on this meeting today? So seeing none, then we will move to the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington confirm the agenda for the special meeting held January 27th, 2020. And I need a mover. It's Councillor McCrae and Councillor Dunsmore. Seconded. All in favor? And that carries. So we have our agenda before us. On the agenda, we had 2 delegations that were submitted in request, and they have also are not here today. They'd also informed us that they were not able to make this meeting or not coming. So 4.1 and 4.2 we will be removing, or they have not come as delegations. Which brings us to section 5, which is our presentations. We actually, Guy Giorno, our integrity commissioner, who is here today, has given us a report as council. That report has been circulated. I believe everyone's read the report. This report, generally, our integrity commissioner doesn't give a verbal on the report. It's a written report that speaks for itself. And we bring it to the floor here for council to review, and if council has any questions, our integrity commissioner Guy here is also available to answer any questions in there. So I'd like to open the report to council for any comments or questions at this time. Any questions from council? Councillor McLean?
Thanks, Stephen. Is this, how much does it cost the taxpayers for this report, for this integrity commissioner involvement?
I'm not sure if we have the invoice on it. Do we know, at this time, I guess we don't know what that it will be.
The second part of that question is, Councillor Gittris ended up having to pay legal fees to combat this inquiry, and does the township cover those legal fees?
That would be something, okay, well, we could take that back as well. I don't think that's going to be something I'll be able to answer for sure, sitting here, but, okay. So I guess we can, would that be something, is that a request that Councillor Kitchis is going to ask, or because I think that coming from an opposite councillor.
I don't know what the process is. We've never gone through this before, so I think it's something that we should be considering for sure.
Okay, so as the aspect of today, we're dealing with the actual report itself. I think that we should stick to the report itself, and if Councillor Kitchis wants to approach that matter as a sideline outside of the report, I would recommend that Councillor Kitchis then approach it via send through the CAO requesting something like that. Because today here we are to discuss the report itself. Does that make sense? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Kitchis?
Concerning the report, can I make a statement about the report? Because we've read it all.
Yeah, I believe you should make. Yeah.
This report has come to us after 7 months. I am pleased with the results. I feel vindicated by the results. I am concerned about the length of time that it took, because having a complaint against you and having to be quiet about it and silent and holding that within you is a lot of stress. And I see that the new process is expedited, but the new process doesn't address whether you need legal fees or not, and that, I think, should come into consideration when complaints are made. And so I don't think I should be able to, I don't know whether you need a council motion for that, or what that whole process is. And then obviously I'm asking myself, and I don't think that's appropriate to have in a council. So I just would like some guidance in that. Overall, I think that what I tried to do regarding this complaint was to just basically inform citizens about these agenda items, and I felt that that's a procedural problem that we have here, and I think that the procedural bylaw should be expedited so that we can address those problems. I also feel that what I attempted to do was bring citizens to be delegations. I wanted more public input into this amended code. Previously, in 2017, I tried to bring public input. It was deferred and said that next time we would do it. I asked for it at this time that it be done, and it wasn't addressed. And I feel that that's a process that we should incorporate into a lot of things where the taxpayer is paying for it, this legislation that comes down from the province. But they should have some say in what is what we have to do here with the code, and also any other things that have to do with their elected representatives. And overall, that's my statement for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kitchus. Any others who want to speak to this report? Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I guess my own reflection on this is I think it is a balanced and fair assessment of facts. I think it is a learning experience for all of us in terms of understanding when we should be engaging the Integrity Commissioner and what are some of how the Integrity Commissioner might interpret things that we may consider are offside. So for me, I think I'm going to walk away and look at this thing and reflect on it more, just to understand what is acceptable, and the fact that, yes, we do have differences in how we tend to communicate. And it's just a matter of sort of being a little more reflective on how best to communicate what we're thinking, so that we don't leave an impression with some individuals that might be misinterpreted and considered a certain way, when in fact, according to what the Integrity Commissioner is saying, it isn't the same sort of thing. But yeah, overall, I'd say that, yeah, it's a very well balanced and fair report.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Steve. Normal jurisprudence in Ontario in a legal action, when an action such as, in this case, this is an administrative tribunal. The Integrity Commissioner is a tribunal of the province. It would be standard practice in a case where a complaint is filed or an action is taken, that the defendant, or respondent in this case, would indeed be awarded costs. That is normal practice in Ontario. And in this case, Councillor Kittredge has largely been vindicated, and I think it's appropriate that the township reimburse him for those legal costs for his defense. And I'd be willing to make a motion there too, that we do that.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I do think that at this point, we have the report on the table that we're going to look at and approve the report. So I'm not 100% sure that the cost of the defense is what we have on the table. If we want to deal with that at a later time, if you said, let's deal with that, I think that would be somewhat appropriate. But since we're just in the report aspect and are we going to accept this report, I don't know if I want to deal with it right at this section of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I've made a motion, and I think you'd have to deal with that motion.
Okay, so you're going to make a motion right now in this section that we reimburse the costs of, would you like to restate that?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the township reimburse Councillor Kittredge for his legal costs in defending this complaint.
Sorry. We just have a point of order. We'll just listen to Councillor Dunsmore.
Yeah, I'm okay with your motion, Bob, but I think it should say any counselor that has to defend himself and not particularly Councillor Kittredge, because you're dealing with one issue at this point in time. If we're going to establish a policy, it should be a policy for all counselors and not done on an ad hoc basis.
Okay, are you able to amend that?
I'd like to make a motion that counselors be reimbursed for their legal costs when defending themselves against complaints filed to the Integrity Commissioner. All counselors.
Okay, and just as a quick question, is that a reimbursement if found, shall we say innocent, or is that all across the board, any counselor defending either way?
In most cases, the courts would award costs when the complaint is, when the respondent is found not guilty, to use the legal word, but in this case, the complaint has largely been discharged.
Thank you. Can I ask, Guy, do you mind commenting on this request? Is this a normal thing within municipalities that a councillor, if they seek legal fees, and the municipality would reimburse such things?
So thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you, in response to the question, some municipalities, I can't say quantitatively whether it's most or a minority, will have an indemnification, a legal assistance or indemnification bylaw that usually covers this, and so normally it's dealt with according to the terms of that. I don't know if the township does or does not have that. It is not unusual. I can't say that it happens in the municipalities that I serve most of the time. It does not happen most of the time. But I will just add this. I can confirm that in most in court litigation, when costs follow a successful outcome, the Integrity Commissioner, while it's an independent sort of law enforcement or rule enforcing or administering role, is not the final say in the matter. Under this system, a report is presented, and then the ultimate decision is not made by the Integrity Commissioner; it is made by the council. So it is certainly open to the council as the ultimate decision maker to decide to indemnify as a result of that. I'm not trying to be vague. Sort of summarize, most municipalities that deal with it already have a pre-existing policy or bylaw. Number one. Number two, I do know some municipalities have reimbursed costs. In my personal experience, outside of there being a bylaw or policy, that is a minority of cases, but certainly it is not unprecedented. And it's within council's purview, because this is a matter for council. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Dunmore, you had? something to,
So then maybe we should pursue a bylaw, and so move this motion to another time until we can get a bylaw like that, and we can have discussion and get probably legal advice from our council as to whether or not we can do this, or what we should be doing, so that we have a blanket policy that covers all of us. So perhaps it needs to be done in a bylaw as opposed to a motion here now.
okay, do you have a friendly amendment? Because we do have a motion on the table, so if there's a friendly amendment, we could vote on to that motion, but we actually, first we should get a seconder to the existing motion. Do we have a seconder to the existing? We have a seconder by Councillor McElwain. And then would you like to do a friendly amendment to that bylaw?
If they're willing to accept a friendly amendment, I would amend that to say that we take the issue of legal compensation for defense of counselors to a bylaw and have that discussion around that in a bylaw.
So we request staff to create that bylaw. Okay. Is that, Councillor Foster, is that?
Yes, I'm okay with that. I think the greater point here, Mr. Chair, is that Councillor Kittredge has been vindicated and that it's common practice in Ontario for the courts to award costs in cases such as this. So I'm okay with that, Councillor.
Sorry, can you use your microphones there?
So my amendment is that we take this to the staff to draft a bylaw about compensation and reimbursement of defense fees for counselors.
Okay, Councillor McCray, you want to add something in there?
I just want to point out, this report was not a complete vindication. So I think it's important that we recognize it's not a complete vindication. And therefore, I just want to state that for the public record.
Okay, so if we desire to go and create a bylaw and ask staff to be part of it, that they draft this bylaw, we would have to defeat this first motion that's on the table and then have that bylaw, because from what I understand, apparently it's not friendly enough. So if we can friendly it up afterwards and then have staff to yeah, unless Councillor Foster would like to withdraw, no, we would have to defeat this motion.
No, you have a mover and a seconder, so.
So we can put this on the
The
floor.
motion's been made, Mr. Chair. You
Okay.
have to deal with it. It's been made and seconded.
You want to deal with it in that way, then? Okay, then the motion to have,
To reimburse
Yeah.
counselors.
that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington reimburse councillors for legal costs incurred when defending themselves with respect to complaints filed against them with the Integrity Commissioner. We have a motion on the table, and we have it seconded. All in favor? Okay, we will do that with that one. Okay. Then defeat. Okay, so all in favor, we have 2, all opposed. So that motion is defeated. Now, I do hear around the council room a flavor for, and I'll let Councillor Dunsmore draft something if he's.
Okay, I'll do that in a minute. I'm the only one who hasn't commented on the report yet. So I get my comments on the table, and I'm happy to throw out a motion regarding the bylaw. I'm appreciative of the work that was done by the Integrity Commissioner on this. I agree that it took way too long. But I know that the Integrity Commissioner represents more than just this township, and so I can only imagine how busy they are. In reading the report, I found it also to be balanced, as Councillor McCray said, but there was a lot said about free speech and how the Integrity Commissioner was not going to engage in counseling people or getting involved in an argument around free speech. And I think a lot of what this complaint came across and a lot of what I heard about this is the tone in which it took. And so perhaps I think moving forward as a council, we should look at, and we can have that discussion regarding the code of conduct we're going to discuss after this report. But we should take a look at how we speak to each other and the tone in which we use. And perhaps we can prevent stuff like this from going forward. And I see he's got two recommendations, one that he wasn't going to deal with the free speech, and then another recommendation that I understand Councillor Kittredge is agreeable to, and I look forward to that being the end of this particular report. Having said that, I would like to make a motion that we ask staff to draft a bylaw regarding legal fees that councillors incur defending themselves against complaints such as this and any other legal matters that may arise out of the performance of our duties.
Okay, thank you for that motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Foster. And then, questions, Councillor McElwain.
I think this is a friendly amendment. I'd just like to see a date whereby we can expect to have that come back to us. And I would suggest it shouldn't be longer than a couple of months.
Is that doable to staff to draft or get advice on that?
Talk to our legal counsel.
Okay, so what are you suggesting? Give me a date if you're making that amendment.
I would suggest the end of March for the March council meeting.
Okay, so for March council meeting. So I will read this. Any other comments on that motion? I'll reread it. Councillor McCray?
I'd like to see in what staff come back with, something that sort of discusses where you're definitely offside and you know that you should have been offside, that there are some repercussions associated with that. I don't want the public to think that we are going to bail out councillors every time they get offside with a complaint. It has to be within reason. I mean, one of the things that I look at is people won't remember what you say, but how you made them feel. And I think that's a key thing we have to remember in our dialogue, is let's be respectful when we are talking about things. And so whatever the staff comes back with, I'd like to see that there's something in there that takes into consideration when we're definitely way offside, that maybe we do need to pay our own fees in that situation.
Okay, so when the integrity commissioner finds them that they have not dealt with integrity. Okay. Okay, I'm going to read what we've drafted here, or I should say Carrie has. So we have a motion that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs staff to bring forward a report regarding the legal costs incurred when defending themselves with respect to complaints filed against them with the Integrity Commissioner and the appropriate indemnification bylaw by the March Council meeting. And we have a mover, a seconder from Councillor Foster. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, thank you. So we're moving forward. We go back to this report. We have, again, the report before us. I think everyone's had an ability to comment on the report. I do think that it was an interesting report. I didn't comment at the very beginning. I think the report speaks to many pieces of it, and we can see how there is much freedom of expression and freedom of speech in our role as councillors, for sure. And it does lay on us as to make sure that we speak as clearly and to try to get our intent across as clearly as possible if we're not intending to be misunderstood. So I think that that now that we've had this report, it's before us, I would like to have a motion on the table to accept this report. Sorry. Quick question. Okay, we'll throw that in. Go ahead, Councillor Kittredge.
I was wondering about the, and I guess this is for the Integrity Commissioner. I was wondering about the public aspect of this report and can a press release statement be made? And all sorts of things about that. So I just wanted to know about how this is communicated and whether there's any guidelines about that.
Sure, we can, we'll ask Guy to come up. I do know that this is a public document. It has been, and again, inside the report, it's interesting enough that the report speaks to the fact that the the process, even within the mayor, or if there's information that's brought out, has the ability to defend and go back and forth in the public setting. So I think that was very interesting to see in the very report. So you will have opportunity as well to make your own statements, but I'll pass it to Guy and see.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, I was wondering if I could ask a question of clarification. Does the councillor mean a press release by a councillor or by the township?
Both, please.
So it's obviously open to a township, to a municipality to do whatever it wants. It is not the norm for municipalities to issue statements on these things. They're matters of public record. They're in agenda materials which are posted online. They, as public documents, eventually will find their way into the Canadian legal institutions information database, which is public, which is just a repository of all decisions of all courts, tribunals, and bodies in Canada, and they'll find their way into public minutes. So, but it's obviously there's nothing that prevents a municipality from saying whatever it wants about a decision taken by council. As for council members, they are generally free to say what they wish. Now the process is over. I mean, obviously subject to the code. One can't contravene a law or code in doing so, but nothing prevents council members. Again, in my experience, it's not common for that to occur, but I don't think anything would prevent it. When I say it's not common, I don't think I've ever known it to happen, but that doesn't mean it would be improper, if that's the question, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you for that. Does that answer your question, Councillor Kitchers? Thank you. Okay. So back to this report then. We have the report on the table, and it is a recommendation to that the Council of the Township of Centermonton receives 2019 report from complaint number 3 from the Integrity Commissioner. And further, that Council adopt the recommendation as outlined in the report from the Integrity Commissioner. I need a mover by Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. And all in favor? And that does carry. Good. And at this time, I would like to open the floor up to Councillor Kittrus if there's inside that report there is a recommendation, and I'm not sure if at this time you would like to take a moment to fulfill that part of the report.
Yes, I would, Deputy. The report says that I apologized for the mistake that I made, and I sincerely am regretful of that.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Kitchus. We do appreciate that as well. So moving on, I think that is, it's important that we move on in a positive way. Then we can now move on into what's called our Section 6, which is the consideration of reports. And Council, before you, we have, we are going to discuss this code of conduct that we've been dealing with, but we do have a PowerPoint, and this PowerPoint, our Integrity Commissioner Guy Giorno will also walk us through a bit of it. If you're welcome back up, and if you want to lead us through, appreciate it. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you, I just want to thank Council, all of Council for the opportunity to be here, and I would be remiss if I didn't as well ask Council to send my regards to the Mayor and my wishes for his speedy recovery. As Integrity Commissioner, I have a number of roles. One of them is to provide education and training, so I've been asked to come and do a bit of that. Also, I can perform any other duties that are assigned by Council, and one of them, I understand, is to provide advice to the Council on the draft code, or the proposed code, whatever you want to call it, before you, and also the draft Council Staff Relations Policy, which I will do. So the presentation that I have before Council, I apologize for the duplicate numbering of item 3, is a 4-part presentation. Since I'm supposed to educate and train as part of my mandate, I wanted to go through the current code, but I don't intend to spend a lot of time on it since on the table is a new code, so it doesn't. I'll only focus on the current code as it relates, in my view, to the decision that is before Council later today on a proposed new code. I then will provide some considerations that I think are relevant to the proposal to amend the code and are relevant to the proposal to adopt a council staff relations policy. And then I also, if I could, Deputy Mayor, want to take a few minutes just to talk about another statutory role of the Integrity Commissioner, and that is to respond to requests from council members for advice. So to begin with, the current council code of conduct begins with two sections that are, actually, three sections that are not in the proposed new code. And I wanted to share with council members why that is advice that I typically give to municipalities, and it was advice that I gave to a collection of senior staff members of various municipalities in the county of Wellington 2 years ago. The reason, the first section of current code's a policy statement, then follow key principles, and then follow reference to statutory provisions. The reason that I typically advise they not be in codes is I find that it's very confusing to have in a document like this provisions that are enforceable and are meant to be enforced and provisions that aren't meant to be enforced. And it's very nice to remind council members, for example, as Section 3 does, you've got to comply with the criminal code. But that's not something that an integrity commissioner can handle, and if people breach the criminal code, there are remedies. There's police and the court. So it's kind of confusing to say you're supposed to do these. Municipal Elections Act is another statute referred to in the current code. That's all important. As candidates, everybody's supposed to comply with the Municipal Elections Act. But when there's a contravention, that's not a matter for the code. There's an own independent process. In addition to that, when statements of principle are set out, it becomes difficult to determine what is meant to be enforceable or not. For example, there's a current requirement to avoid giving preferential treatment. That's a clear standard. It can be enforced. A complaint can be made. But the same section also says, act upon the principle that democracy is best achieved when the operation of government is made as transparent and accountable to members of the public as possible. That's a very important principle. It's a principle nobody would disagree with, but when it's in a code set of rules, one has to ask, what does that mean? Does that mean people can complain when they feel council members have not acted transparently? And then the Integrity Commissioner will travel up and hear people and say, yes, you were as transparent as possible. No, you weren't as transparent as possible enough. So again, it's my advice to council members, and it is reflected in the draft that the proposal that's going to be considered later today, to remove from codes of conduct anything that is vague or fuzzy, to be very clear about that which is aspirational and not enforceable, and don't put it in the code of conduct, and stick to rules that are clear and measurable, and then so a council member can know. I mean, in my recommendation to councils and to this council is that what should be in a code is a series of standards that are clear enough and specific enough so council members know this is what we're obliged to do, and this is what we are prohibited from doing. And if it doesn't meet that test, it can go in another document, not the code. I'll return to some of these comments when I address the council staff relations policy, because I see that as a differently constructed document with different objectives that doesn't necessarily have to fit within that model. I won't comment on the definition section. There are some things about the current code which I think are mostly cleaned up in the new draft. Section 7 of the current code deals with confidential information. Section 8 deals with conduct at council and committee meetings, and I thought I would spend just a moment talking about that and the approach taken by most integrity commissioners. Sorry, I apologize. Not most, many integrity commissioners. So there are two schools of thought among integrity commissioners. Some are quite happy to entertain complaints about conduct at council meetings or committee meetings. There's another school of integrity commissioners, including every integrity commissioner who has ever been appointed by the City of Toronto, including the first integrity commissioner anywhere in Canada, who believe that it's really not the place for integrity commissioners days or weeks after a meeting to come and investigate something that was said by one member of a deliberative body to another member of a deliberative body, when, under the Municipal Act and under the procedural bylaw, the presiding officer already has all the tools necessary to deal with order and decorum and unparliamentary language. So it's my view, and as I said, many integrity commissioners share this, and not all, sadly not all, that whether or not they're in a code, these matters are best left to presiding officers, and issues of what's said at a meeting should be handled on the spot when it's fresh. And now I realize that we're videotaped, and there's a record, so I guess in theory somebody can, after the fact, go back and look at what was said, but it seems to me not an ideal way to proceed, and not the most efficient use of municipal resources to have integrity commissioners do that. That is reflected in the new draft code, and that's an explanation why those words are there. The suggestion is that when things happen at meetings, there better be a good reason to go to the integrity commissioner, and a good reason, for example, in the new draft is if the council itself says this happened at the meeting, we're throwing it over to you because for whatever reason we who were there decided it's something we want an outside set of eyes to look at. But apart from that and other exceptional circumstances, my recommendation, which is reflected in the draft, is not to have people after the fact go. And I, as I said, I do serve a number of other municipalities, and there are many municipalities. In fact, there's one municipality where I served as integrity commissioner. I don't anymore because a new mayor got elected. I knew the mayor, so I can't really. It was a conflict for me to remain as integrity commissioner when I knew the mayor. Anyway, that municipality, most of the complaints I received were about things that happen at meetings, and you've got to ask yourself whether that's an ideal way of proceeding. Conduct of public events is in current code. Discrimination, harassment is covered. Improper use of influence, these are all covered in the new code. Use of municipal property is covered. Conduct respecting the staff, I have some comments in the existing version, but they're better dealt with in the new draft. Sort of a refresher in these next slides on what the gift and hospitality rules are. There is a $300 disclosure threshold in the current draft, and that so I'm going to skip over that. I don't think I have anything more to say about the existing code that is relevant because you're about to consider a new draft. If I might, Deputy Mayor and three members of council, I'd like to proceed to what I think is more pertinent, and that is my comments on considerations for what to do with a new code. I'll begin, which I believe staff, I know staff has pointed this out. The Municipal Act gives great freedom to councils to decide what is in a code of conduct and what's not. Nothing is out of bounds. But there are four, as a regulation in the Municipal Act, there are four sort of mandatory elements. They're listed in the presentation, and I can confirm that from my review, the draft before you addresses all the mandatory elements that are required to be in a code by the regulation under the Act. I should add, by the way, the regulation doesn't say what the content of those is. It's just the subject categories. You got to tick off. You got to have something on confidentiality, something on use of the township's property, etc. So I now return to some additional considerations about the rules, and I've touched on this point already. Codes of conduct under the Municipal Act are they're not just policies. Some municipalities call them policies or codes, but they're laws. Everything the municipal council does is done by bylaw. So whether you call your code a bylaw, or you call it a schedule to a bylaw, or you have a bylaw, even the confirming bylaw at the end of a meeting, which adopts a decision. So this is a lawmaking function. Council is making a law. It's a law that under the Municipal Act has penalties. A council member can, council ultimately decides this on the recommendation of the Integrity Commissioner. A council member can have pay suspended. So there are sanctions. There can be financial sanctions, there can be reprimands, so there are penalties. In Canada, our Canadian sense of justice and fairness is that where there's a law and where there's penalties, there are certain prerequisites before somebody can be held to account under that law and be penalized. And I've listed them in my presentation. The first is that the law has to be known and public. Canada's a society where we don't have secret laws, and we say, "Oh, haha, got you! You didn't know this was against the law, but here it is." Right? So. But I don't just mean that to be glib. There's got to be then an understanding by every council member what it is that is right, expected and what is expected not to occur. The rules also have to be clear, not fuzzy. This is why I commented on, earlier on a statement like acting as much as possible to be transparent. Well, that's a very high-minded principle, and nobody can disagree with the principle, but that's not a clear rule. That's not something, right, a councilman can say, okay, the decision today to, do I act this way or do I not act this way? And the guidance is that, there's no clarity there. So it's important when one is making rules that are enforced by penalty that there be clarity. And then I add as a second consideration, not just clear, but certain and predictable. This is why I recommend, rules that don't leave it to the feelings of a person, be it a council member, be it a complainant, be it an integrity commissioner, as to what the rule means on a given day. There are many words that we can use that in Ontario law have clear meanings. Harassment, for example. Harassment is a term, right? It doesn't matter what my opinion is, council member's opinion, a complainant's opinion. Under Ontario law, harassment is understood, confirmed by the courts to have certain attributes, the course of conduct, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So using words that have meanings that are understood is good. Using terms that leave it to whatever integrity commissioner happens to feel are not helpful when there are penalties at the end of that. So my strong advice is to ensure that your code can be objectively enforced and is not left to subjectivity. And the last point I make, which sort of goes to clarity and predictability and certainty, is measurability. When I say measurable, I mean at the end of the day, if there's going to be a penalty, it has to be measurable whether somebody did or didn't do what was supposed to be done, whether somebody did or didn't do that which was prohibited. So that's it, sort of general comments. I have some specifics related to particular language, but I want to begin with that introduction. In fairness, and I pause now to recognize there is another approach. There are some who believe that these codes of conduct should be not rules-based but values-based, that they should be high-minded and aspirational and say all sorts of lofty principles. So I just acknowledge that, and if you go through the internet, you may find other municipalities that have things like that at school. My simple advice is that, and it's up to council. Council can do that if it wants. Is that that's not really helpful when we have a municipal act requirement that this be done, and we have penalties at the end of it. You can't have values-based statements and then people losing 90 days' pay. Right? The only way, and as I said, in our system, we understand that is this clear rule. So I'm very much giving you advice based on me belonging to the school of thought which believes these codes should contain rules, not just abstract values. Now, there will be times, including in deliberations today, for example, and my advice to you today, when you'll see a section of a code or a provision that it doesn't meet those tests, right? It's not clear or certain, it's kind of fuzzy, right? So my advice to council is, when confronted with one of those, you don't necessarily have to jettison the section. There are really two options. That is one option. One option is to remove it. If it's not clear, if it's too fuzzy, you can remove it. An alternative is to simply acknowledge that it's there, but it is aspirational and it's not enforceable. So that's the alternative. As long as it's clear that this is just a statement that is there to set lofty goals, but nobody's going to be able to make a complaint because it is too abstract and too fuzzy to be the subject of a complaint, that's fine. So it doesn't have to go. It can either stay as long as it's clearly acknowledged not to be enforceable, or my advice would be to drop it. Or to amend it so that it is clear. I think I've covered off this point. I believe in codes only work if it's clear to a member what the member has to do and what the member doesn't have to do. I just wanted to then pick up on that and say that, like any law, this is what I'm saying now, Deputy Mayor, and through you members of council, is not unique. It's just standard consideration you'll know from drafting other bylaws, and it's the way Canadian laws in Canada are drafted. We try, drafting of laws, ought to try as much as possible to ensure that the standards that laid out are objective. So what are some of the tools? Well, for example, sometimes a rule will base things on actual knowledge. right? So doing things knowingly, right? That's sometimes a standard in laws, and that can be a standard in code of conduct. And I know this next point has come up in some of the discussion from council members, but the concept of reasonableness, reasonable person, reasonably known, that is in Canada, that is and other countries as well, but certainly in Canada, that is a very conventional legal formulation in a standard. That, so when we say things like should know, right? So conduct which you should know would cause offense. That doesn't mean conduct that actually causes offense, but conduct that a reasonable person would expect. And I know the question is, well, what's a reasonable person? Well, there are some tests. It's a person, who's informed of all the facts. But ultimately, in Canada, we are left to the judgment of courts, and in this case, integrity commissions, about what's reasonable or not. But it's widely accepted that the reasonableness standard is meant to be objective, and it's not meant to be based on the particular views of person A or person B about how things would be done. Perception as well. I know there are some questions about perception. In law, the perception of actual people is subjective. That's a subjective standard. But reasonable perception is an objective standard, and it can appropriately find its way into a law. So if we talk about, if the word is reasonably perceived, that's not, that isn't fuzzy. It would require the integrity commissioner, or if it's a different bylaw, a court, or a different bylaw, another tribunal, to look at what a person apprised of all the facts reasonably would think about a situation. So through you, Deputy Mayor, I'm responding to some of the commentary. I do think that that references to reasonable perception, to what a reasonable person would do, if you wish, appeals to actual knowledge, are ways to ground these rules in a foundation that will then make the rules clear, certain, and measurable, which is fair to council members and fair to the members of the public of the township. I now wish, if I might, just to make just a few comments on a few specific pieces of the draft. And what I've said is sort of lays the foundation for this. Disrespectful behavior. Look, ultimately, your Deputy Mayor, it's up to council to decide what it wants in the code. I mean, the legislature's clearly said that councils decide what goes in the code. They put in the things they want, subject to the four mandatory elements required by the regulation. So if council wants to define disrespectful behavior, that's up to council. I do note that the second sentence doesn't use a reasonable person standard. It actually uses a subjective standard of the recipient, and I would certainly suggest that that's not there are problems with that drafting, right? I mean, ideally, if we're drafting, we would not talk about things that cause hurt feelings and distress, because then you're leaving the determination to the feelings of the recipient, and each individual recipient would be different. A more conventional standard would be, that I'm thinking of the Human Rights Code, so it would use this behavior that ought reasonably to be known to be likely to cause hurt feelings, or something like that. Sorry, I'm making this up on the fly. But replacing that with an objective standard than a subjective standard would, I think, improve the definition in section 1.5. If I could, and I hope you don't mind, Deputy Mayor, I'm anticipating some questions because I've been privy to the questions that the council members gave to staff, and they're in the agenda materials for this meeting. So I'm addressing some of them. Section 3 of the proposed draft deals with interference. And I know council members are familiar with this, but Deputy Mayor, if you might indulge me, I just wanted to give a bit of background again on the rule of law and the importance of the independence of law enforcement. So there are many aspects that make up the rule of law. But one of them is that rights under the law and the nature of the law doesn't depend on who's in power and doesn't depend on who you know. that there's certainty and predictability and fairness to everybody in Canada, everybody in Ontario, everybody in Centre Wellington. Closely associated with this is the independence of law enforcement. Again, we believe in Canada, right? We're very fortunate to live in a country like Canada. It's not like this everywhere else on the planet. Whether the law gets enforced against you doesn't depend on who's in power. Whether the law gets enforced against you doesn't depend on who you know. So we have a principle in Canada that elected officials don't decide who gets the law enforced against them, and they don't get to decide who doesn't get the law enforced against them. And a bylaw is a law like any other law. I mean, yes, it is true that employees of the township go out and enforce the law, but bylaw enforcement is a form of law enforcement. So this is why I'm very pleased to see in the draft, I think it's very important that the draft code acknowledge that that the operation of these law enforcement, bylaw enforcement officials, the Provincial Offences Act, that's bylaw, right, be done without any interference. Now, what that means, to be very clear, though, that means interference in their law enforcement functions. So, whether to investigate, how to investigate, whom to investigate, and ultimately the biggest decision, whether or not to prosecute. Those are things that, on a case-by-case basis, ought to be free of any interference from a council member. But as I say that, I want to also stress that there are many things elected officials at the municipal level, provincial level, federal level can do with law enforcement. First of all, as a matter of general policy, I mean, back up for a second. First of all, the council makes the laws that get enforced. So ultimately, council gets to make, change, rescind. So I mean, that's the ultimate control of elected officials. They're the ones that determine what is on the books. They're making the law. You're making the laws through your deputy mayor to the council. You're making the laws that get enforced. That's the first control that council members have, and that's not interference in law enforcement. If council doesn't like a law that's enforced, it can change the bylaw. Number two, as a general policy matter, it is absolutely, as long as there's no dealing with individual cases, absolutely, elected officials can hold law enforcement to account. Are you acting efficiently? What's your volume? What priority are you giving to these type of complaints over those type of complaints? What's your time for delivery and completion? Are you fast enough? Are you slow enough? We're hearing from people, like, all of these things in general are absolutely appropriate for elected officials to talk about. It's not interfering in law enforcement in a general matter to ask why, you know, the average standard response time is 12 days or 3 days or 6 days or 24 days, or to ask why it is that resources seem to be expended dealing with this type of situation when there's a perception that maybe resources aren't that type. I mean, so those are all legitimate. The reason I say that, Deputy Mayor, is I sense there from seeing the communications they put on the draft, there's a desire to know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and elected officials do have to respond to constituents. I would draw the line at carving out individual cases of law enforcement. My concern about the sentence that was added between the June 2019 draft and the current draft, the sentence that members are encouraged to raise their questions or concerns with the CAO, is that doesn't avoid the problem if the question or concern relates to an individual situation. And again, I'm not going to, it's not my job to be integrity commissioner to the staff, but bylaw officers, municipal law enforcement officers are to be independent in the discharge of their duties, independent from senior administration as well as from elected officials. So changing the course of an investigation by councillor input to senior management, which then flows down, is also problematic. I understand and understand what's what's sought by this new sentence in section 3.1, but I would recommend that if council is trying to struggle with the right balance, I think the line of demarcation is between individual cases where there should be no communication and general matters, call them policy matters, call them aggregate matters, where I believe what's established it's appropriate for elected officials to engage. So my advice would be to make the part of section 3.1 that says what's okay, as opposed to saying if somebody doesn't like what's happening with bylaw enforcement, they can talk to the council member to go to the CAO. And I don't want to prolong this, Deputy Mayor, but just on the same point, I mean, one asks with what intended outcome? If the intended outcome is to change the course of law enforcement, that is problematic. That's why I don't. I can continue, Deputy Mayor, or I can pause on this point if it's something that Council wishes to talk about.
If you don't mind pausing, it looks like we have a few questions from councillors. So, Councillor McCray, I see you have your hand up, and I can go through there.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was the one that put that clause in. My reason for putting that in is, who can you go to find out what is appropriate and what isn't? I mean, as a new councillor, for example, it's a little challenging at times to know what you can do. Like, I know you're not supposed to go and try and interfere with bylaw enforcement and tell a bylaw enforcement officer what to do, but sometimes you need to know who can you go to talk about what can I discuss, what can I discuss. So the reason to put that was to say the CEO is the one who's going to be able to advise you on what is appropriate and what isn't. Not that I'm asking the CEO to intervene.
Oh, well then, through you, Deputy Mayor, to the councillor, and to all of council, I think by adding additional words at the end of that sentence explains what the purpose of the inquiry of the CAO is. I think would address the concern that I've just raised. Yes, I would add words at the end of the sentence.
Thank you. Are there other questions in this section? Councillor Kittrus?
We have constituents ask us about bylaw enforcement, and we've been told that really we shouldn't be involved in bylaw enforcement at all, and we should just direct it to some staff member, and we don't have any say in that. So what are the limits of what we would be able to do when a constituent asks us about some bylaw enforcement issue?
Yeah, so I think, through you, Deputy Mayor, I understand the question, and I'm very sensitive. Like, I know what happens in the real world. I know that when there is something that a bylaw may define as a nuisance, right, the person who is aggrieved will go to a council member and say, there's this, what are you doing about it? Like, I understand how it works. Certainly, referring people to actual lines of authority. Here is how you make a complaint. Here's the phone number. Here's how to do that. It is something that's absolutely acceptable. As a general matter, not a specific matter, raising through the CAO, again, talking about the CAO. So, for example, saying that Mrs. Smith at this location has a concern about noise coming at all hours of the day from 1-2-3-4 Main Street, and what are you going to do about it? That's interfering in bylaw. But talking to the CAO more generally about the fact that there are what is happening generally with noise, how much resource being devoted to noise complaints as opposed to other things, are ways, without interfering with the course of law enforcement, that these can be taken to administration. One thing I know that hasn't been asked, Deputy Mayor, as part of the question, but I do not recommend. I know some municipalities do it, and I don't know if the township does it. Some municipalities were in the habit, I understand, of giving councillors by ward a breakdown of bylaw enforcement in their wards. I don't recommend that, because it's simply an invitation to. Well, I think that actually giving those stats while cases are ongoing is probably risk interference at most, but giving those sorts of stats suggests that the law enforcement is a political matter. So I don't know if the township does that. I don't recommend that municipalities do that.
Good, and apparently we don't, so that's good. Other questions in this section? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Stephen. A question about parliamentary privilege. You know, we need to be able to speak freely, and my concern is having a code of conduct that allows that rather than impedes that. So do you see this draft as impeding that need to speak freely about things that are often contentious and difficult?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, if I understand the question, it's not about this section, it's about the code generally, or the other sections? Well,
For example, Guy, you mentioned disrespectful behavior.
yeah, so ultimately, it is up to the council to decide what it wants the rules to be. I will say a few things about that, if I might, Deputy Mayor, start jumping ahead. The first is that I do have, if council is going to go down this course, it is important that the words that are used in the code be clear and unambiguous. So I do believe, and I was going to draw attention later in this presentation, to a few words, to some examples of words I think are problematic for enforcement. You know, there's a reference in draft section 10.2 to avoiding laying blame, I believe. The word blame is there. That's again, it's an admirable principle, and I think we'd all agree that it's not really constructive to lay blame. But at the same time, a lot of times an organization, including a municipal corporation, improves, moves forward, solves problems, represents by diagnosing what happened, figuring out what went wrong, and then taking steps to correct that. Now, is that laying blame? Is it not? If I were the person who may have, been part of the what went wrong that got diagnosed as part of, the steps toward making things better, I might feel you're laying blame. So I would avoid a word like blame because it's unclear where in the continuum of unconstructive pointing fingers on the one hand, and the other continuum of getting to the root of what went wrong so the council and the municipal corporation could fix it. I don't know where a particular situation fits. Those are the sorts of things I would recommend be avoided in a code because they are in fact ambiguous. So that's my next comment. The next comment is that but this is a choice, right? This is a choice. I am a servant of the municipality. I will, in sort of, because it's pertinent to this question, Deputy Mayor, address another issue. I apologize. Typically, it's my practice, most integrity commissioners don't do this, but it's my practice with a report to table what I call an accountability report on the costs, where I tally up sort of what the cost per hour has been. I didn't have time to do that work, and I say what's been invoiced to date for this file and what is yet to come, and in the Township of Centre Wellington, that rate's $300 an hour. So ultimately, I work for the township and for council, but council has to decide, what sorts of things ought to be delved into at $300. And that's just the fee. It could be $250 or $350 or $400 in the municipality with a different integrity commissioner. It's not about my right, but at that cost to look at things. So I've laid out in the report that council has just considered some of the case law and practices and discussion around political speech, right? This is my advice to you, it's an opinion, but it's my advice to you. I think you could differentiate between what political actors say to one another, because two elected officials or two politicians in the same space have equivalent platforms. They got equivalent things, right? I would recommend you consider that differently than dealings with the staff, because the staff don't have the same platform. The staff don't have the same ability to speak back. The staff are more vulnerable position. I would differentiate between, council, two things said to one another by council members or said about one another by council members, distinguish that from what's said about a member of the public. Because again, a member of the public doesn't have the same platform as a councilman, the same rights to push back. So I think it's appropriate. And I think council should ask if it is things said about elected officials against each other, does that justify the integrity commissioner coming in at so many dollars per hour? And maybe in a lot of cases not. In fact, my recommendation is in a lot of cases not. I think in a lot of, but to be clear, Deputy Mayor, members of council, I think it is different where there's a private citizen on the other end of the what is said, and a staff member who can't speak back on the other end of what is being said.
Thank you, and I guess you can see where we have what's called that council staff policy as well, relations policy that we speak to that's outside of this code of conduct that we have before us today as well. But we paused in that one section to discuss it, and Councillor Foster, you sort of asked for a comment on the entire presentation. Would you like to continue and finish your presentation, and then we can go back and ask
I'll
questions?
be very quick. I'll just jump to section. So really, the answer I gave through you to Councillor Foster's question is pertinent to all of section 9. And council has to think of what it does. I did want it to focus, though, on one particular section. That was the reference to falsity, right? So this is very much I acknowledge, Deputy Mayor, this is very much a live topic. Governments are dealing with cracking down on false statements, the internet platform dealing with false statements. It's a live issue, so it's no surprise that it's being discussed here in Centre Wellington. I just want to make two observations, though, about the proposal to ban statements known to be false. The first is the Supreme Court of Canada, right, has given us caution about this in a case. It's a case about 92. What's that? Almost 30 years old, and it was a case. It was a case involving reprehensible statements that almost everybody knows are false. It was a Supreme Court of Canada case on Holocaust denial. But even then, the Supreme Court of Canada said some things about cracking down on false statements. The Supreme Court of Canada said, if you have a law that says you're cracking down on everything false, you're then not able to discern between things that are false in the public interest. And the Supreme Court of Canada used two examples. They used the example of environmental activists or people calling for environmental action who might say things like, the planet has 12 years left, or in X years, half the cities on the Atlantic coast will be flooded, or things like that. And the Supreme Court of Canada says, do you really intend to parse those and say that even though there's a well-intentioned public policy outcome behind them, it's wrong if those are factually inaccurate? The other example used by the Supreme Court of Canada is what if a medical professional, to draw attention to a health risk, uses a word like epidemic. Thousands risk their lives. The Supreme Court of Canada said, well, what if that's factually inaccurate? What if it's only hundreds or dozens? Do you actually intend to say that false speech? So the Supreme Court of Canada actually said, it's easy to think that there's a dichotomy between falsehood and truth, and false always wrong, but sometimes we might want to allow people the freedom in the course of making a plea to the public to say things that aren't factually accurate. Then the Supreme Court of Canada said the second thing, which I think is also true, and that is that often truth and falsity are in the eye of the beholder. Context is important. What people understand is important. There's something, I don't want to make this, and apologize, council members will know this, but I don't want to go on. And when a situation, when a political matter, a topic, any topic, whether it's climate action or any topic, there's usually a complex bundle of facts which underlie the public policy problem. And when one talks about it, one employs a selection, communications people would call selection and salience, meaning you select those facts of the bundle to highlight in what you're saying, and you give weight to them. You give more weight to another. And this is why in political discourse, often people say you're you're false or you're misleading. It's not, sometimes it's because people are saying things that are false. But other times it's because the two different protagonists are giving priority to different facts in that bundle of facts. And person A highlights these and plays down these, and person B thinks these other facts are more important. And the Supreme Court of Canada has cautioned us about getting into saying black and white, truth, false, misleading, not misleading, when often what you say about a situation depends on what facts you're choosing to highlight as you say things about it. So I personally, I mean, council can do as it wishes, recommend against making the Integrity Commissioner the arbiter of this. And if I might, in closing this point, use an actual case. This is a public case in a municipality in eastern Ontario in the county of Renfrew. A council member, in discussing a building owned by the municipality, which was kind of like a community center, right? And there was a public meeting on the fate of this building, and the council member said, well, everybody knows this building's full of asbestos. And that was a complaint, and I was given engineering reports and this and that about whether there really was asbestos there or there wasn't, and the complaint was it's false to say a building's full of asbestos. And I just caution council members, do you want people complaining if a council member says something that is factually inaccurate or not? And by the way, in that case, a lawyer was involved for the council member, and the lawyer pointed out, well, like, full of, does full of mean literally? When people say full of, do human beings in the English language actually mean 100% composed of? Or do they just mean there's lots, or there's some? It's an expression. And the lawyer, what I think is a good point is, like, when people, are we now going to parse down, expressions that we use and treat them literally because there's now a statement of falsity? So I caution against this, and I in closing, I do so mindful of the fact that I think we do have a real problem on the planet with false things being said and perpetuated. I'm not diminishing that. I just wonder whether the code of conduct is the place to address those.
Thank you. And, okay, should we finich this report before we go to questions, and then?
Thank you.
I think that'd be a good way to.
So
continue.
I also point out, and I say it's not intending to be debating this. I intend, as the person who, once this is passed, or me or another a future integrity commissioner will be interpreting this, I point out that Section 10, if I might say charitably, I think is trying to have it both ways, or maybe it is. If it isn't meant to have it both ways, then it's just not clear. It seems to me it's saying you really shouldn't do these kind of things, or you really should talk. But if you're going to talk about them anyway, say it's your personal opinion. And I'm not trying to be glib or dismissive, but that's contradictory. I mean, if people are expected not to say things or only to toe the municipal council line, so to speak, I said that pejoratively, then that should be said if that's what council wishes. If council doesn't mean that and simply wishes to say that if you're speaking, you should say that you're speaking for yourself, it should be left at that. I do think that the current Section 10 in its entirety is unclear. And I'll add another comment on that. I think it's useful to use the same word to mean the same thing. And to me, I think when the old code had to differentiate between comment and opinion and information. And so I thought in the old code, comment meant like opinion, and information meant like facts. But the new code now talks about comment and information and opinion. And of course, it leaves the question, does opinion mean different than comment, or so I would suggest that if that one word be always opinion or always comment be used if they're meant the same thing, so nobody comes later and says, well, they're meant to be different things. But I do think that this section, as drafted, would need some managing to make it more clear what is expected. And if I might, I was going to call your worship, Deputy Mayor, recommend to council. I mean, one way to approach this is to ask, what do we mean? What do we want done? And then to what's the expectation? What do we want to happen? And then have the drafting follow from that. And as I read this, it was not clear exactly what was wanted to be happened. I did, if I might, I'll just take a few more minutes. I'm sorry, I know that time is valuable. One, I did want to comment on the because I was asked to comment on the draft council staff relations policy, which Deputy Mayor, you referred to. The first is, I have nothing to say about the substance. It is up to the council what it puts in it. However, there's a proposal that the Integrity Commissioner be an enforcer of it for council members. So from that perspective, I wanted to comment. And I'm aware, as I think the report that you've just considered indicates this, I'm aware of all the work and the deliberations, the facilitated sessions, the work of Mr. Brady Wilson and Juice Inc., and like all the different steps that have gone into developing this. I also note, that you don't have to treat you can treat the council staff relations policy as a law, like a set of rules. You don't have to. This is aspirational, it's visionary. That's up to council. It can certainly adopt a document in that manner if it wishes. However, at the end of the document, there's an enforcement section, and how the preceding pages are drafted does have an impact on how you enforce this. So if I might, I just would want to recap, because again, I say this in the context, Deputy Mayor, of a draft that says at the very end, the enforcement in respect of councillors lies with the Integrity Commissioner. I want to recap what that means ordinarily. Right? Sorry, I should clarify. It says it's enforced with the Integrity Commissioner under the Code of Conduct, like as if it's a breach of the Code of Conduct, meaning like a complaint under the Code of Conduct. So to recap what the Code of Conduct process is, it's complaint driven, right? So complaint means somebody says somebody else broke a rule. There are two parties. It's adversarial. There's a complainant and a respondent. The complainant makes the case, the respondent makes the case. There's an investigation. There is then a report. There are findings. There are findings of fact, like you saw in my report, facts. The commissioner finds facts. The commissioner also interprets things, makes findings about what the rules mean. There's then a conclusion. The conclusion is there was or was not a breach. Then there's a recommendation to council, and council has a range of sanctions. So that's the process. If at the end of your council staff relations policy you say it goes to the Integrity Commissioner, it either means throwing it into that process, or as Integrity Commissioner, or Integrity Commissioner working with you, I've got to create a new process for things under the council staff relations policy. So the Integrity Commissioner process as it currently exists, the Code of Conduct, complaint, investigation, penalty at the end, that lends itself to situations where there are clear rules. You know what you're supposed to do, you know what you're not supposed to do. The process I've just described does not lend itself where there's uncertainty about what the rules are or how they apply. That process also relies on what I call ascertainable facts, measurable facts. It only works where an Integrity Commissioner can investigate something and come back and say, here are the facts and how they apply to that. That is not the only way to go. I quote from the draft policy because I read this line. It says, respectfully holding each other accountable to these agreed upon behaviors. So that's not an Integrity Commissioner. Like there are other models. That's a model where the staff and the council collectively are working to hold each other to account for meeting those norms. That it's up to, I'm not recommending that. I'm not recommending, I'm simply saying that's an option for council. Mediation is an option for council. Some kind of a process where a process facilitator comes in and brings people together. Somebody who's got experience, that's an option. It doesn't matter what council chooses. I am simply flagging for the fact that the way it's drafted going to the Integrity Commissioner means the regime I just described. And I'm not sure, I mean, that's putting it too, I doubt that when we've got that some of the words in here, speak the truth, no holdbacks, assume positive intent, drive for common ground, find the best option, those are laudable principles. And if the enforcement is by process facilitation, if the enforcement is by a mediator, if the enforcement is by some other process, those may be enforced. But those words, I don't think, can be enforced through the Code of Conduct complaint process, which involves a complaint, complainant, respondent, adversarial process, investigation, two sides. So, again, it's up to council. I leave it to council. Council can, I am, again, I want to be clear. I am not saying council cannot create a council staff relations policy that is aspirational like this, that is values-based, that's goals-based. It's certainly your right to do that. And I know a lot of work has gone into it. It's just the last part where you suggest that that would be enforced. I don't think enforcement is the right word for that. So if you're going to enforce it, you'd have to, or to summarize my point, if you're going to enforce it through the Integrity Commissioner, you're going to have to change the top part. Or if you want to keep the top part, I think you've got to think of a different model of resolving differences or problems that arise under it. And I'm sorry to be so firm in explaining that point, but I thought it was important because of the proposals that come to me. If I might just leave this last point, I want us to talk about advice to individual members. The Municipal Act, new provisions of the Act took effect last March, say that council members have the right to ask the Integrity Commissioner for advice on their obligations under the Code of Conduct, under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, under that's fine. If I receive a request, I will give an answer. However, I just wanted to flag that this is advice on an individual council member's obligations under the code. It's not a mechanism for the Integrity Commissioner to give one council member policy advice on what the Code of Conduct should say, or to do legal research for a member, or if council as a whole wishes to assign the Integrity Commissioner this question, that's certainly appropriate. But I just wanted to flag that when individual council members contact the Integrity Commissioner, the way the Municipal Act is situated, it's only to ask for a specific question about their obligations, and by the way, their obligations under the Code of Conduct, under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, or another bylaw or policy that relates to ethical behavior. So not even individual, like, I can't give advice on the Municipal Elections Act, for example. I can't give advice on something else. I just thought it would be helpful to explain that. I thank you. I know I've taken a lot of time, Deputy Mayor, but that completes my presentation.
Oh, thank you very much. It's there's a lot to absorb there, and I think you can really see the desire of council to try to have a positive relations within each other, how we speak to each other. I really appreciate the aspect of how you bring forward that if we have aspirational comments, that we pull it out of the Code of Conduct, and then when we have our staff relations, if we have aspirational, that we don't want to push it back into the very same thing we pulled it out of for that purpose. So that'll guide us as we continue to create these two documents. I appreciate also the depth of what you've gone through in walking us through this process, what we should look for. So thank you very much again for attending. Are there questions from council for Mr. Giorno? Thank you. Councillor Dunsmore.
We started this whole process with the code of conduct that came off your website, so I'm interested. Do you have a staff council relations code of conduct that you go by on your website at all?
I don't. I may have, to be honest, I think I've been involved in commenting on a few and maybe drafting one, but not many.
Absolutely. Follow up, Councillor Dunsmore.
So of the municipalities that you represent, do any of them have a staff council code of conduct on the go right now?
A few do. Well, I think they're passed. I think that many do and just haven't involved me. I should say that, like
Right.
many, like I think I act for the Durham municipalities. I think they all have them, but they've not really engaged me in those. I think Agila Tosserantio has just adopted one. I think Madawaska Valley has. I mean, I can certainly, through you, Deputy Mayor, through the clerk, Madam Clerk, I can send them and that can be distributed to council.
Are they more complaint-based or are they aspirational, like the ones you were talking about?
No, actually, the ones I'm thinking of, I have in my mind, are actually very thin. They're a page and a half, which is simply address the legislative requirement to have one and simply don't do anything except refer to other policies and laws. But I'm not advocating that. I'm simply stating as a fact that some people just have a council staff relations policy that adds nothing new and just points to a bunch of other policies and things.
Good, thank you, I appreciate that, and maybe we can discuss that as to whether or not we reference out or reach out to other municipalities. Councillor Kittredge?
Considering your report that you made earlier concerning complaint, 9.3C that you have these observations in 10.2, would it be advisable to perhaps just exclude those from the present code?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I mean, I treat them slightly differently. I don't know how a reference to false or misleading statements can be redrafted to address the problems that I've identified, which actually the Supreme Court of Canada identified. I don't know how so I don't know how 9.3C could be amended. Therefore, my advice would be to, if council is asking for my advice would be to delete it. 10.2, however, it's not for me to say it can't be saved or the problems I've identified can't be fixed by redrafting. I think as an example, for example, some municipalities, in fact, many have very short statements like that, which simply say something like, well, acknowledging the right of a member to explain why the member has dissented, they simply require that if you're going to talk about something that council has done, you at least be accurate. And I'm not trying to get into the truth or falsity. Like it's very short sentence that says, if you're going to say why you voted against something, just at least describe what you voted against accurately. Like it's very short. So 9.3C, I don't think can be reworded to achieve a result without problems. It is conceivable that 10.2 could be reworded, in my opinion. But I'm not recommending that. It's up to council to even go through that effort or delete it or whatever it is.
And that's a conversation maybe council can have as we go through this. So, thank you. Councillor Kittredge again.
Regarding the definition of friends that was put in, would people that make political donations or work on campaigns be regarded as friends?
So the short answer to that is no, but that's not the only section of the code that has bearing. So there is a definition of a friend, but the draft code in section 2, and I'm referring to 2.4 and 2.5, does have bearing. So 2.4 talks about advancing a private interest of a member, a family member, or a friend. No, I mean, friend, I said earlier that there are terms which are sort of have now standard interpretation. In Canadian conflict of interest and ethics governmental jurisprudence, friend is defined to mean somebody with one has a close bond of affection, not like an acquaintance or sort of person. I mean, there's a sort of list of tests. These are not exhaustive, but friend is somebody you may celebrate birthdays with, or you might exchange gifts with, or you might go on family vacations together, or you know the person's spouse's name or the person's children's names. Like those are friends, and you can distinguish them from maybe acquaintances, right? So there is actually like an objective definition of friend, unless a campaign contributor fell within that definition already. The mere fact of a campaign contribution would not make somebody a friend in that definition, but 2.4, beyond friends, says you can't advance improperly a private interest of any individual. So advancing improperly, if there was actually a quid pro quo or a trade-off, right, or pay to play, then exchanging favors for campaign contributions, if it existed, would be caught by 2.4. Also be probably illegal under the criminal code. That's a whole other story. In addition, 2.5 says you can't give preferential treatment. So if a council member treated a campaign contributor differently than the council member would treat any other resident of the township of Centre Wellington, that would contravene 2.5. So that's all there. The next point is, it is possible for the municipality to say more, to go further and attach more restrictions. That is pretty much unprecedented in Canada, the municipal and the provincial and federal level. The council can certainly do that. It's up to council to do as it wishes, but it's just sort of explaining. Generally, the thinking of most governments, I said of all three levels in their rules of this nature, is that if campaign contributions are made, they're within lawful limits, they're properly disclosed under the Municipal Elections Act or the Canada Elections Act, or whatever, that's sufficient, and it's not thought necessary to impose other strings beyond what I've already said. I mean, as I said, preferential treatment to somebody who is a campaign contributor is just as contrary to the code as preferential treatment to somebody based on another criterion.
Thank you. So, so basically, as long as everybody follows the same process, the same rules and everything as it goes through, whether there's individuals within the community that donate to campaigns, as long as everything continues to follow all the same guidelines, then they're not outside that rules of the code of conduct.
Yes, and I will add one thing I forgot. I may have mentioned this. I think I mentioned this at the county session. The Ontario Court, there's one court decision which indicates that a campaign contribution is not sufficient to trigger a pecuniary, like a relationship under the MCIA either. So you're not subject to that, and that involved $400 municipal donations to Board of Education candidates.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McElwain?
Steve, under that same basic heading, can reasonable perception get involved with election contributions? Either reasonable perception of the public or reasonable perception of the people making the donation.
So I would, given the way that this question has been addressed in other jurisdictions and in Ontario and by Ontario municipalities through your Deputy Mayor, my response to that would be no, not without one of two things. Additional facts which change the situation. So if there was actually discussion between candidate and contributor about an outcome, that would be additional facts which would throw it into regulated. Or if there was actually something in the code of conduct which actually caught that. But no, otherwise, I would not think it. If I was the one interpreting this, I would not interpret that to be to satisfy the reasonable person test in the context of everywhere else where it is understood that these contributions can be made and they're not regulated without more. But I say without more. If there were particular reasons to believe that campaign contributions were exchanged for action, that would be a different story.
Yeah, and I like how you put that again, perception again. This is what you just explained. The entire document was within the code of conduct is if we leave it up to perception, then it puts it outside of actual facts or actual rules that we can actually measure. So I like how you put that again. So thank you. Councillor Foster, you were up. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Guy, I'm concerned about Section 10.2. I believe it appears to me to even contravene the Municipal Act. We have a duty to represent the public. How can we do that if we cannot make statements to the public and speak clearly to the public? It impinges our duty under the Municipal Act and maybe even under the Canadian Charter for the right of all citizens to speak freely.
Comment?
Well, I don't have anything to say to that. I think that, I mean, I will add, I'm not trying to be glib, I mean, that depends on which aspect of 10.2 you look at. The aspect that says you can't do stuff, the aspect you say you can do stuff. But I do agree. It is clear that municipal councillors have a representative function. They've got many functions, through you, Deputy Mayor, you have many functions. One of them is a representative function. It is also true that municipalities act by bylaw. Bylaws are laws, and a bylaw that infringed on a constitutional right would be problematic. But it's up to council to address 10.2 in a way that it addresses concerns like that.
Yeah. Thank you. And I, Councillor Foster, I did have that on my radar as well, and I see it now in the presentation, so I think that council will be having that discussion for sure. Thank you. Other questions? Regards. Councillor McWayne?
Not a question, just a comment. I really appreciate your presentation this afternoon. You've clarified the background for a lot of this more than had been previously, and so I appreciate what you're trying to do and understand a little bit more why certain clauses are included or not included, and so thank you so much.
Others? Councillor McCrae?
I guess one question I have, just for clarification. So, a lot to digest today. So basically, the code of conduct recommendation is to keep that more sort of rules-based, whereas with the staff council relations policy, that could be more of a sort of values-based or aspirational, focused on certain goals that we want to try and achieve as a group.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the answer is yes, with the emphasis on could be. I don't express an opinion on how the council staff relations policy could look, simply to say that approach is, if council wishes, a fine approach. There are other fine approaches too. You could have a rules-based council staff relations policy. You could have a skeletal council, but there's nothing, in my view, principle wrong with the way it's drafted, except for the enforcement piece.
Thank you. Follow-up?
Yes, please. So basically what I'm hearing is that sort of section, handling of complaints shall be done in the manner set out in the applicable code of conduct or policy. Just remove that?
That is one way to handle it, yes. So it's again, I should be careful. I mean, Deputy Mayor, I'm very respectful of council's right to do as it wishes. That certainly would be one solution that would address the concern I've raised.
Yeah, and maybe I'll remind council that our integrity commissioner is not to tell us exactly how to draft it then. So if we view it that way with our questions and say, okay, what's absolutely against it kind of thing, to help us process. Councillor Kitchus?
There have been some inquiries about citizens can use the code of conduct and make a complaint, but they can't seek advice. And I was just wondering what you would comment about that.
I'm just sort of rubbing my head because the Municipal Act is unclear. The Municipal Act does, for council members, it's very clear. Council members get to send written requests and get written answers. The Municipal Act says nothing about the public except among the duties of an integrity commissioner is public education. So I interpret the Act, given the difference and the cost associated, because I'm an officer of the municipality, that this does not mean that it's, an open question and answer service for residents, no matter how important it is. I interpret the public education mandate to be public education with the office of something that's approved by the township at a forum, if you want to have me come and answer questions. So it's something that the municipality has sanctioned because the municipality is ultimately paying for it. The only exception, through your Deputy Mayor, is when somebody comes up with a complaint, I do feel it is part of my role, in part because the Municipal Act says I have to it's the integrity commission's determination whether or not to have an investigation, right? That does involve explaining to a member of the public what the code of conduct process is. Here's the code of conduct. This is what it says. So there I will educate about process only, because if somebody's come up with a complaint that can't be considered, I will explain the process or that. But apart from that, I don't think I should be answering questions outside some kind of township sanction.
Thank you. And this would definitely entail public education being here today because it's live streamed, so that's good. So you fulfilled that. Absolutely. Councillor Kittrus?
So, you're saying that for the public that can make a complaint, they should make the complaint and then seek advice? Is that how you're?
No, that may be an implication of what I said. That's not what I meant. I simply meant that for members of council, the Municipal Act is very clear that you can say to me, I hold this property here, this zoning bylaw applications before council, am I allowed to vote on it? And I must give an answer. I will answer that. It does not give that right to members of the public. I infer their right to have the process explained to them when they make a code of conduct complaint. But that does not mean they get substantive answers. It's same thing. I will not. I don't think it's appropriate. If I receive a complaint, or somebody asks how do I file a complaint, I'll say here's the form, or you must set out allegations, you must refer to the code of conduct, you must number them, you must explain what's. So I'll explain that, or I'll explain the process involves two sides. It's confidential till it goes to council, then it's public. I'd say that I will tell them that the respondent will know your identity. Those are the sorts of procedural things I will explain to a member of the public. It does not. I do not, nor would I for a member of council explain what I think of the facts. In fact, that's actually a very common thing that and I think other agencies, tribunals, it's not just integrity commissioners who get this, people will say, here's my concern. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Did Councillor Smith break the code? And I say, my answer is I can't answer that because the determination whether the code was broken results from a fair process, which hears both sides and gathers evidence. So no substantive advice will be given to a member of the public or to a council member. The only substantive advice a council member will get is in respect of the councillor herself or himself.
Thank you.
Or in this case, himself.
Councillors? Okay, so thank you very much, Guy Giorno. And then, so I think council, we should discuss this policy before us. And if we have further questions, we can definitely dig deeper into those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you walking us through this process. So council, Carrie, did you have anything you wanted to speak to on this? The two different options, you want to explain the two different options that we have before us in option 1 and 2? And how they differ from each other when option 1 came forward and option 2? Is that, and then where the little additions of comments are on each option? Okay, thanks.
Sure. Through you, with respect to the reports, Section 221 of the Municipal Act requires municipalities to establish codes of conduct for members of council and its local boards. In October 2017, council adopted a code of conduct and asked staff to forward the document to the Integrity Commissioner once he or she was appointed for review. Staff did this in February 2018, and the Integrity Commissioner shared with us and all the area municipalities within the county a template he suggested would be appropriate code of conduct that addressed the legislative requirements of the Act, and in particular Ontario Regulation 5518. In June 2019, staff brought forward this code of conduct based on the template provided by the Integrity Commissioner with two added components from the 2017 version. Those components being the definition of disrespectful that council had requested be included, and the communications and media relations section. Council deferred consideration of the 2019 version of the code to afford members of council more time to review the document and provide comments to the municipal clerk. Councillors Kittrus, McRae, and McElwain and Dunsmore all provided comments. The report before you today is a breakdown of the comments received and a summary of the revisions incorporated into a revised document. The staff recommendation provides two options. Option one is the revised code based on the comments received from councilors, and option two recommends adopting the code that was placed before council back in 2019, which is based on the template provided by the Integrity Commissioner, however, includes the definition of disrespectful and the communications and media section.
Thanks, Carrie. And I was trying to break this down as much as possible because there's so much information there. So option number one has a lot of added verbiage, if we want to call it, of comments that council put into it, which could also put us at risk of aspirational pieces and such and so on. And then option two, it is the draft, but we have two things added: definition of disrespect and the 10.10, which is about the communications. So council has those two options before them, or we actually either work for something different, which could actually be going back to, say, option three, which is go back to the draft and removing the definition of disrespectful and number 10 about communications. So I definitely put that on the table. We've talked about finding that middle ground. Put it out to council for some discussion here. Councillor McElwain?
Thank you, Steve. I think we should be removing one option without even talking about it. I mean, all we're doing is splitting the vote and potentially ending up with no answer. We should end up with a yea or nay decision to make today, not a three-way decision that just splits the vote. Taking either of the options and suggesting that we're going to accept that with possible amendments, to me, makes a lot more sense than giving us three options to vote on. And potentially, I mean, my intent today when I came here is I want to get this thing finished and out of the way and in our past, and we can't do it with three options, in my opinion. I'm not even sure we can do it now today, given what we've just heard from Mr. Giorno. There may be enough changes that he's suggesting, recommending, that we can't just do it on the fly. I don't know. I would like to, but I'd like to get it out of the way. But I don't think we should be doing it with two options to work with.
Thank you. And option three is the amendment of the number 1 and 2. So that is exactly what I'm saying. So you and I at least agree there. I put it out to the councillors, if somebody wants to make comments on that idea of how would you adopt option 1 or 2, or if you have a preference towards it. Councillor Dunsmore.
So I'm assuming that option 3 is the amended code with 9.3 removed, 10.2 clarified, and changing the term of disrespectful behavior to reword it to be reasonable person standard? Is that the option 3 we're looking at?
No.
Option 3 could remove everything that we added in and just go back to the draft from,
Yeah, through you, the part 9.3 is only in the option 1. It is not in option 2. If you removed 10.2 and the definition of disrespectful, you would basically, in option 2, you would basically have what the Integrity Commissioner gave to us in the first place.
that's exactly, and that's my point. Instead of being stuck with option 2, we remove whatever we had added in. We go with what the Integrity Commissioner initially advised us to go with, because there's no aspirational wording and we move forward in that way. Councillor Kittrus.
If we decide not to put forward any of these amendments, are we in violation of the law in any way?
Through you, with respect to the Code of Conduct, you have one in place that meets the legislative requirements.
Yeah, remembering that we sent ours to the Integrity Commissioner for advice. So we have one, we sent it for advice because he's also needing to make judgments based on our integrity, our code of conduct, and he's saying, he's coming back and recommending that there's some wording in there that's making it difficult to make those judgments, and therefore coming back with a recommendation saying, if you want me to do this, this would be very difficult with these wording in there. Therefore, here's my new recommendation. So I think that if we are going to send something away to a professional and receive feedback, especially when he needs to make very important decisions on that feedback, we should take that seriously. Thanks. Councillor Dunsmore, yeah?
Well, I'd like to move that we accept the Integrity Commissioner's version of the Code of Conduct, which would be option 2. I'll make that motion. With the amendments that we talked about,
With
yes.
the amendments, that's right. And that's a motion on the table
Yep.
then? Do I have a seconder for that motion? No. I would actually second that motion to bring it on the table. So, okay. Is there any discussion, comments on that motion in accepting that, the Integrity Commissioner's recommendations? Councillor Foster.
I'm not totally opposed, Neil, but what we need is a very clear statement with a very clear draft that specifies out exactly what option 3 or option 2 as amended actually is. If we don't have that, and if we don't have the time to study it, make sure it's clear, I'm not prepared to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. The clarity is we are basically accepting option 2 with the amendment of removing the definition of disrespectful, and which is 9.1
2.1 or something?
or 2.1, and then also this section which is 10
No, 1.5.
and 9.3.
No, and 10.2.
But 9.3 is the,
No, 9.3 is only
In
in
the next
option 1.
right, sorry.
That's right.
So removing 1.5 and 10.2,
1.5 and 10.2.
which
What-
leaves you with the original document.
No.
No,
No, it's not.
There's remember there's 2 different drafts here, so if you only stick with the I know, but that's why
That's
we-
the problem,
if you're to
right in a
pull-
nutshell.
If you pull out your option 2, throw all the rest of the documents away, and then say, remove 1.5 with the amendment of 1.5 and 10.2, that is what we're recommending today, very, very clearly.
Just removal of 1.5.
Removal of 1.5 and the removal of 10.2. Yeah,
no,
Three's not
9.3 is not in option 2.
yeah, you need to pull that document out of your package if you need to, and set it in front of you, that's a very clear document then.
That's the
Thank you.
Integrity Commissioner's document.
Councillor McElwain?
Just to clarify, if I look at the list of attachments and click on which? Draft Code of Conduct, October 2019, no, the COR 2019-49.
Yes.
And so if I go to COR 2019-49, and I take out 1.5, you said?
Correct, 1.5,
Which
removed,
talks about disrespectful behavior.
Yes.
correct, because it's,
Okay, and that's good, because I already had that marked. And if I,
10.2,
but 9.3 is not an issue because
10
it's,
its entirety.
10 is in.
10, it's in its entirety, because it speaks towards communications. That gives council the freedom to speak to their residents, to how they feel about things. It gives total freedom to council for speech.
Mr. Chair, taking out the whole of 10?
Yes.
Yes, all of 10. If you read all of 10, it speaks towards passing through, now I don't have it in front of me, but passing through all communications through the CAO.
So
or
10.1,
communications.
10.2, 10.3.
The entire 10, yes. Okay.
10.1 to 4, yeah.
So if you want to clear, that's right, so if we want a clear option, it would be that the council of the Township of Center Wellington adopt the Code of Conduct as presented by the Manager of Legislative Services and Municipal Clerk at the Committee of the Whole meeting dated June 17th, 2019, with adding the amendment of removing 1.5 and 10.1 to 10.4.
10.1 and then just 10.
Through to 10.4, through to 10.4. Yeah. I made that up as I went, so don't confuse me.
And Mr. Chair, that's exactly what I meant. It's an unclear thing.
No, it's
Give us,
it's
have a
right there in
draft
front of
that-
you, so,
yeah.
okay. So,
But the confusion at the table is exactly what I was referring to.
okay, so there is, if you grab option 2, okay, and then scratch those. Well, it is an addition,
It's a
or
resolution.
a resolution, the way we work together. And that is what, and that's what Councillor Dunsmore has moved, and I've seconded, and we're looking for comments from council.
Sorry, once more, just for clarification, all of 10 was being removed?
All of 10, because
All-
that's the restrictive piece towards communications.
Okay.
Yeah, and to be very, very clear, this is the one that came directly from the Integrity Commissioner. So there's no, so we're moving ourselves back to the recommendations of the Integrity Commissioner. That's literally what it is. Yeah, oh, Councilor McCray?
I have one question related to 9.2. It says, "No member shall display disrespectful behavior as outlined and defined in section 1.5. So would 9.2 be removed as well, since we're removing section 1.5? Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I get clarification? Were we removing disrespectful behavior altogether or changing it to reword it to the reasonable person standard?
It was your resolution, so you can,
So it's gone then?
you can remove it in its
Yeah,
entirety.
okay, nope, that's fine.
It's, okay. It may be easier to remove completely.
So it probably should have 9.2 removed also.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because it refers back to 1.5. Yep.
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
Is that clear? I think it's quite, I don't want to bring it to a vote if there's other questions, so if there's any other questions otherwise. Councilor McCray?
So just to clarify, we're removing 1.5, 9.2, and all of 10.
That is correct. Okay. Okay, Councilor Kittrus?
I'd like to add something in the investigation process, in the sense of, I like that it's being it's done in a shorter bit of time, but I think it should have for the respondent something where they can, it sort of says 7 days, but I think they should be able to apply for an extension. Because that's what I did. I was going on my holidays when I received this, and I had to apply for, ask for an extension. And I think we should have that inserted in there. Also because if you need to have, maybe get legal advice, they don't drop everything and come towards you.
Yeah, and our CEO report will comment.
Just to clarify, so as 13, the commissioner does have the discretion to extend any of the timeframes and deadlines in the protocol. So the IC already has that discretion, Councillor Kittrus, so if that meets your satisfaction, that's strictly to their taste.
Thanks. Good. So I'll bring this motion, going to call the vote. All in favor of option 2. Would you like me to read it one more time, as amended? Okay, so the option 2, which are that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington adopt the Code of Conduct as presented by the Manager of Legislative Services and Municipal Clerk at the Committee of the Whole meeting dated June 17th, 2019, with the amendment of removing 1.5, 9.2, and the complete section of number of 10. And I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Good work. Working on getting this put together. Okay, and then brings us to what's called the 6.2, which is the amended staff council relations policy. And here we can really see through the presentation where this differs. This is more aspirational. How do we speak about things? We're not referencing back to a code of conduct with rules. I'm going to open the floor. Do we have a report from you, Carrie, or?
I can say a few things.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to start this off. Thanks.
Okay, through you, Section 271 of the Municipal Act requires municipalities to adopt and maintain policies with respect to the relationship between members of council, the officers, and employees of the municipality. At the June 17th, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting, council deferred consideration of the staff council relation policy to afford members of council an opportunity to provide their input and comments to the municipal clerk. Comments were received from Councillors Kittredge, McElwain, and McCrae, and the action taken by staff with respect to those comments is outlined in the staff report. Differences of opinion on various aspects of the policy made incorporating all of the comments very challenging. Therefore, staff will defer to council to select the appropriate direction.
Thanks, Carrie. So we have this policy before us. I wanted to start off first with, I think we've taken some good advice from our integrity commissioner in regards to on page 4, the handling of complaints, in the last two sections or pieces. So we definitely, I think that we should see that could be removed from this, as it would then push us back to the code of conduct. I'm going to put it out to the floor for comments on the other pieces. So, councillors, any questions? Councillor McElwain.
Thanks, Steve. I have a couple. First one is under councillor role. Our role is provide oversight, and I don't think that is really captured in there as a point really well defined, and I think it needs to be, it's a major role of ours, and I think we need to address it specifically. My other comment has to do with the norms and the staff norms, et cetera. And basically, my recommendation is that anything referencing the juice session should be removed completely. I think it's, I think they're too difficult. This is meant to be a policy that goes forward not just to our term of council. And you know, when you get to the next term of council and they don't know who juice was and have to sit through that and try to interpret what we mean by measure our trajectory and et cetera, it's unmeaningful. And I think that whole section on the norms should be removed. It's just too obtuse to have any obvious meaning for the future or for today as far as that goes. We can keep the council rules of thumb. We do that anyhow, so it doesn't really bother me one way or the other to have those 2 points. But the rest of those 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs talking about juice, in my opinion, should be completely removed from the document.
Okay, I'm wondering if we should take this piece by piece and then walk through this with council here. In regards to your oversight for council roles, would you feel that it's sufficient if it says right underneath it says govern, provide political direction and oversight? Would that be acceptable for that one piece, Councillor Foster?
I think it should be a separate point because it's very important. It underlines, having it as a separate item, a separate bullet point, I think is very important.
Okay, how would you word it?
Just simply a bullet point, provide oversight of the municipality.
Okay. Is council willing to have that addition? No pushbacks there? Okay. Thank you. I don't have any pushback on having an extra line. Councillor.
Sorry, that's a problem.
Okay, Councillor Kittredge, go ahead.
We don't have oversight over staff. Like, it's a total problem. Like, we only have, under the Act, over senior, and, we don't rule everything. Like, we don't, that's just the way it is. And we can't say, that. Like, it's just, we just can't say that. So we do have, and I think it should just be exactly what the Municipal Act says. That's what we should put in. And nothing different than that. That's sort of what but to say oversight, well, homicide is
That's
just
what's
not.
proposed, exactly what's in the act.
Okay, as what we're seeing. Yeah, so that is what's proposed, and that's a very good point, Councillor Kittrus, thank you. Because sometimes I think oversight meaning oversight of the CEO and the documents, but I wasn't as thinking as deep as what you were, so good call. Okay, everyone okay with that? I think we really need to be okay with that new comment. Are you good with that, Councillor Kittrus, or Councillor McElwain and Councillor Foster?
So, Kerry, it is in the act, in the Municipal Act. Did I hear you correctly?
No, what we see today before us on paper is what the act says. Correct? Correct. Okay. Okay, so it's, this is what, I'm looking to Carrie for
well,
this.
Through you, as well as comments made by Councillor McCray, I believe.
Okay, with
Yeah,
additionals inside,
yeah,
but, okay.
yeah. That's why we've deferred this to council, because of the differences of opinion.
Okay, are there more, so on the oversight piece, I just want to deal with that one wording. Are we content to leave that piece out? Okay. So then let's walk through these lists. I'd like to speak towards the council norms and the aspirational aspects of what Councillor McElwain said. This is the one document where we can speak towards those aspirational norms. Council norms you spoke to was speak the truth, no holdbacks, assume positive intent. That is the section, is that correct, Council? That's correct. And how does council feel about not having that in there, or is this where we speak towards the higher level aspects? Councillor Kittrus.
I agree with Councillor McElwain about this section. I think it should be removed. I just have to be really frank. We don't know the truth. None of us do. We're not really in that. I've said that many times. We're not in the truth business. If you have speak the truth, no holdbacks, you'll have war, because everyone thinks they're speaking the truth. And I don't want that. I don't think that's a great aspiration. I think we should be much more humble. We should say we seek. And if the whole gist of the juice thing, I disagree with. If you've read the report, you know that. I think we need to have the roles, but our aspirations, there should be the same norms for both staff and council. They need to be totally different. We serve the public, and they should have ones that are the aspirations that are like that. There should be not two of them. So I feel that the whole exercise there was for a version that I don't agree with fundamentally. I think that we can have different aspirations that see that we're all in public service, that we have something that we can bind us together. This one here actually separates us very radically that could be binding us. And so I would, my preference is to not have this staff, council pass it today. I'd let it. But if we're going to need one, if we have to have one, I would remove all these norms at all, because I agree with Councillor McElwain. I don't feel that they're useful. I feel that you need to have much more democratic, unifying aspirations. We have our roles. We know our roles. We the ones where we have the rule of funds, where we know our roles. But I think that we should have different aspirations. Where staff and councillor are one unified body for those roles. And the exercise that we had there of having two different camps, and don't agree with that at all. I think that's something I sort of thought of a list of things, but I don't know whether is the time to sort of say what those unified ones would be. And my preference is to just scrap this whole area.
Thank you. And Councilor Kitchers, I do believe that the reason that whole piece with Juice took place was for the building of this document to say, how do we, what are we going to do? How do we want to work together? Here we sit together now in an open council session, having the same conversation again in that area. And I think that that's one of the difficulties is sometimes we work towards trying to do what's called building unity. As we had in our report today, we can see that we don't necessarily all even stand on that same ground. So we start off already at different areas where unity maybe isn't the end goal. I think that if we can't agree on these things, then we will need to do, I don't want to do another Juice session. We do, and we can't talk about this over and over at council. What's our intent with this? Do we want to scratch this and continue as has been? We need to move forward. Councilor McRae.
Thank you. I guess just to clarify, so my understanding is what is being proposed by Councilors McElwain and Kittredge is to remove the section that starts with, we are committed to building a stronger partnering relationship based on the following team norms developed with the assistance of Juice, and continuing through where it finishes with council and staff together designed and agreed upon rules of thumb, a shorthand decision-making filter. Anyone can apply in a situation to determine what good governance should look like. Is that the section that you're proposing be removed?
Just you need to go down, as I said, and I don't mind if rules of thumb are left there, to be honest, because, as I say, we do that anyhow. It's not a big deal. And we do the rest of the stuff pretty much as well, but it's just putting it in paper like this makes it too formal and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But we need to go to the paragraph after rules of thumb and take out the reference to team norms as well.
So quite frankly, we're looking at removing everything that we did as a team to try to build the norms in a staff policy. So we're really just, is it page 3? So Councillor Dunsmore?
So I go back to what the Integrity Commissioner said about this document and that it's an aspiration. There's no enforcement here. It's a set of norms where we try to lay out how we're going to communicate and how we're going to treat people. And if speak the truth is a problem for people, then you can remove that. But I think we need norms. If you want to put it all under one and put it under staff council norms so that we're all working with the same page, I'm fine with that. But I mean, there was a lot of good work that went on here, and I know some people disagree with that, but I think there was some good conversation and some good issues that were brought forward. And to be able to treat people following these norms, to me, is a good step forward in how we're working now.
Councillor McElwain?
I just want to repeat what I said earlier. Basically, these norms were kind of developed for a particular situation because we have kind of a dysfunctional council, and these norms are designed to address that. They are not necessarily the proper norms for the next term of council, and they aren't particularly meaningful norms to somebody who hasn't sat through the Juice sessions. So I think that if we're going to have aspirational goals, each of us has our own aspirational goals already when we signed up to become councillors. We don't need to have them written there, and staff have their own aspirational goals. As far as our roles, defining our roles, fine. I mean, those are kind of already defined anyhow. Relationship is fine. The rules of thumb are fine. It just, those norms that were defined by the Juice sessions are not particularly useful to us, are not useful at all to us, really. And they will not be particularly useful to the future terms of council.
Thank you, Councilor McElwain. Okay, so I hear two different sides happening here. I see what's, something like this would be reviewed each term of council. I can see where we could remove the developed with the assistance of juice, scratch that line. But I do think that these are important things that we went through a lot of work to talk about how we work together. And I would like to make a motion that we remove just the wording developed with assistance of juice. And that's in the line just above council norms. And I would like to see that we make a motion that we continue with this in our council staff relations policy. So that we keep that there. This way we can make a decision, do we want to remove this or not? So I'm going to move that, and I need a seconder to see if we keep that in there. Seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor of keeping that, removing that one line and keeping the rest in the document? Okay. And all opposed to doing that? Okay, that's defeated. Okay, council, give me some direction. What do we do with this? Make a motion, Councillor McRae?
I'd like to suggest we remove that term, develop with the assistance of juice, under council norms, because I'm hearing Councillors McElwain, Kittredge have some issues with speak the truth, no holdbacks, if we remove that. Assume positive intent, I think, is fine. We'll drive for common ground to find the best option. Measure our trajectory seems to be another juice acronym, maybe remove that. We will respect the decisions. Bring no surprises. We represent and reflect the voice of the community.
Sorry, to be clear, did you say we will respect decisions? Were you saying remove that?
No, I guess the ones I'm suggesting under council norms to remove is speak the truth, no holdbacks, measure our trajectory.
Okay.
Under staff norms, I think everything's fine there. And then, let's see, further down, again under, yeah, no, I think that's it.
Thanks. So that's your, is that a motion?
No, I'm just suggesting to see what others think, if that's.
Okay. Okay, if I can just say one thing. First off, I do find this a little bit incredible, because this is why we sat down. We voted, we went through each piece, we talked about it, we voted, do we want it in, don't we want it in? We literally did this exact thing. So I remind council, we're doing the exact same work and having the exact same conversation a second, probably third time. Can we get comments from that? Councillor McElwain.
Thank you. I would just say that, yes, we did go through this in an abstract way. It was never intended or never mentioned that it was going to be built into a proposal or report that is coming to council as a, what is it called? A policy. That wasn't part of what we were doing in the juice. It was never mentioned that it was coming forward to council as a policy. That was done afterwards. And if it had been advertised as policy development, I would bet that the words would have been completely different. Conceptually, there might have been a lot the same, but it would have been completely different worded, because it was going to be a policy and it would have been meant for a long-term policy for council. Right now, it's not. It's a one-term council thing, and you're going to have to go through the whole thing again in the next term, the way it's worded right now. And that policies don't get renewed every term of council. That just doesn't make sense.
Okay, so comment on Councillor McRae's recommendation?
I still feel the same way. I think the whole thing should be deleted from the juice sessions.
Okay, Councillor Kittredge.
We got no choice in what we wanted to do to bind us. We didn't get any choice in who we chose to help us bind the council. That was chosen outside of we didn't know that it was going to become a staff policy. We didn't, so all these things we didn't know. the aspirations that I have. I've done team building. I don't, but I've also worked in a cooperative, and their aspirations are democratic, and they're about we need something that binds both staff and council. The Wilson one, which I sent an email to, I said that I think that this is ambitious in what you're trying to do, but he has a package that he promotes. It's about trust. It's about building trust. And I sent email around. I was ignored. Those things didn't get addressed in that meeting. And I don't think that tweaking it right at the last minute here is going to help anything. And I am against that process. And I feel very strongly that we need to have, not tweaking little words, putting, this will just call all the norms one bundle is going to change anything that this is. I feel very strongly about that. I said that at the meetings that we had. I told that to the consultant. And it's true. We didn't know this was we just thought this was an exercise in orientation. I missed the first one. So, and I think that this has not been very fruitful. It's caused a lot of, division, actually, because we disagreed on it fundamentally, and I was willing to fight against it. And so I think that this whole effort that has happened and that we've had this complaint and everything is partly about this whole thing. And I think that it will continue if we don't vote on this and we're all unanimous about the whole thing, then we shouldn't move forward with this. That's just my feeling strongly.
Thanks, Councilor Kittrus. I guess one thing, if I just look through here, the way, because we have to give some type of direction to staff, because we can't ask them again to go back and look at it, because this is what they're asking to us, is to give them direction. So this is a difficult part we're in today. One of the things I feel strongly is, if we're going to talk about, we said, well, we can't do the scratching, I really think we are the only ones that can do the scratching as council. And the only way we can do the scratching is to look at it and say, which are the things that we don't intend to do? And that's really where, this is a document of aspirations, a document of our desires. If you don't intend on speaking the truth, we don't intend on having a positive intent, start scratching. Then, because that's really how when you say, I want to scratch this, we're talking about perception. I say, it means you don't want to do that one, because that's really one. So, that's the reality of perception. So I don't know where, guide me then, to teach me what we don't want in there. So, all right, Councillor McCrae.
Thank you. I'm looking at the number of people we have here. There's no way we're going to get a vote that's going to pass if we leave the juice norms in. If we were to remove the section that starts with, we are committed to building, down to the end of council will use the rules of thumb as a decision filter, take all of that out, reading through what is left, I think the intent of what we all were trying to achieve, staff and council, is still in the document. In what we're seeing, this revised document, it's including comments from various councillors in terms of changes they wanted to see, so that all stays in. But it's just removing the juice norms. The unfortunate thing is, this was something developed by staff and council. Now council is deciding to arbitrarily remove this without comment from staff. But if this is going to achieve what we'd like to do in terms of being able to move forward and adopt a council staff relations policy, then I'm prepared to live without that section.
Okay, will you make that a motion then?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay, so a motion on the table that, sorry, I'll clarify those pieces. So the motion on the table is that we accept the policy, council staff relations policy, with the removal of section on page 3, just above, we are committed to building a strong partnering relation, all the way down to the very bottom of the page. That's correct?
And also, the handling of complaints shall be.
Right, I was gonna, yeah, perfect. And then, then we remove the handling of complaints paragraph, and where this is a discrepancy will be removed. Those three, then we have a motion, excuse me. We have a motion on the table for that. Can I get a seconder?
Can I just ask for clarification? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it including the rules of thumb or delete that
No,
as
right to
well?
the bottom of the page, council, right to the, below staff and in the community. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is correct. So page 3. It says, okay. Okay. So we are going to start removing at the section where it says, we are committed to building a stronger partnering relationship based on the following team norms developed with the assistance of JUICE, enabling partners to get their needs met skillfully. These agreed upon norms are as follows. That paragraph, including everything down to the bottom of the page, will be removed. Okay?
So just leaving paragraphs 1 and 2.
Just leaving paragraphs 1 and 2 on that page. We will also be removing on the last page, the paragraph, the wording, handling of complaints shall be done in the manner set out in the applicable code of conduct or policy, and also the paragraph where there is a discrepancy between the council and staff relations, and thus following. So right to the end.
As well as number 3.
These two?
Okay. And I would just point out the number 3 just above there also references to the integrity commissioner, so we'll just be capturing that piece. So is that clear? I can read it one more time, or,
The monitoring conventions, we're in that.
that's right, yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at the bottom, in the monitoring contraventions, you'll see number 3, it speaks towards the integrity commissioner, so we'll be removing that. And then the next 2 sentences as well, or paragraphs, right to the bottom of the page. Anything that references back to the code of conduct or the integrity commissioner.
So why do we have this whole 5? Why don't we just remove all that?
Sorry?
Why don't we just remove that whole thing? Because the integrity commissioner said that, if you just repeat the same thing over again, like, it would just be a code problem.
That's it. You mean remove section 5 there?
Monitoring and contraventions, like, it would just be, what would be
Comfortable,
in
yeah.
the code.
No enforcement.
Sure. Yeah,
No enforcement.
okay, we can remove right at the, there's no enforcement, it's an aspiration. Thank you, Councillor Kittredge. Section 5 is completely out. I'll remind council just to use their speakers when they speak for the public as well.
Section 5 would then be removed.
That's correct. Section 5 would then be removed. Councillor McElwain.
No, I'm sorry, I was playing with my pen.
All right. Councillor McCray, happy with this? That's moving? Yeah, you're happy
Yes,
with this?
yeah,
Isn't
no,
it?
I'm
I'm
happy with
changing your,
that, yeah.
yeah.
I'm
Okay.
happy with that.
And we got a seconder of that? Oh, sorry.
We don't have a seconder yet.
No. Councillor Kittredge.
I'll turn it on.
Actually, can I have let's get it on the ground, on the floor, and then maybe have some comments. So a seconder. We have Councillor McElwain has seconded it, and now comments to this motion. Councillor Foster.
Just a very minor point, Mr. Chair. There's 2 Section 5s, I believe. Monitoring convention is Section 6. I say that only for clarification. We'd be removing Section 6, monitoring contraventions, because it is a aspirational document.
You're correct, just like,
Just for clarity, thank
yeah.
you.
It's twice we've done that. We got 2 3s earlier on, so. Okay, so we were going to removing monitoring and contraventions, that entire section. I'd like to call the vote on this. All in favor of proceeding with that motion? And that's carried. Okay. We now have a council staff relations policy. So now we're, have all my paper there? Okay, good. Okay, we have we're into section 7, which is a confirmatory bylaw, and we have a bylaw to confirm the actions of council The recommendation is that the bylaw 2020-01 to confirm the proceedings of council at its special meeting held January 27th, 2020 be introduced a first, second, and third time and passed in open council. I need a mover. That's Councilor McCray. A seconder is Councilor Kittrus. All in favor? Okay, and that is passed. Then we need a motion to adjourn. Councilor Kittrus, seconded by Councilor Dunsmore. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you. Yeah.